Dear Minister, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our event on Nordic Resilience, a key topic of our times. We have been studying for years security of supply, developing different models to understand flows and connectedness in this neighborhood, and also headed by our research director, Mikael Vikel, shedding understanding on geo-economic interaction as a key part of today's geopolitics. The topic is very urgent, and we have been investing quite a lot of resources on understanding the Nordic networks, not so much on the microphones. But I guess you are hearing me well. And I'm a little bit taller than the microphone stand. We have some little bracket. Can you, well, it's not a... So this product, the report today, the report Nordic Resilience, Strengthening Nordic Cooperation on Security of Supply and Crisis Preparedness, will be presented today. We have the key authors with us here. The aim of the project was to explore the possibilities for further strengthening Nordic preparedness, cooperation, recent events like COVID-19 and the Russian aggression has clearly demonstrated the importance of thinking about this ahead of the curve. Now it's working. As one of the most interconnected regions in the world, it is only through cooperation that the Nordics will be able to mitigate serious supply disturbances and possible cascades that result from them. The report is strong when it comes to recommendations that are relevant for the Nordics as well as the region and the regional actors on the whole. The work of the report was conducted by a team of FIA researchers. They need to be named because they did excellent, fantastic job in putting together this report. Mikael Vikel, Mariette Hägglund, Christian Fjeder, Emma Hakala, Johanna Ketola, and Harri Mikko. Long list of researchers kind of illustrating the importance of the topic as well as the wide know-how on the topic that FIA has accumulated. Today we will hear presentations of this report by FIA Research Director Mikael Vikel, followed by comments and remarks by Viri Vakelo-Sjögrund from the Ministry of Interior and Nutti Nikola from the Finnish National Emergency Supply Agency. Minister for Nordic Cooperation and Equality, Thomas Blomqvist, will then close this seminar with some final remarks on the topic of Nordic Resilience cooperation. We are very grateful for having the Minister participating in this seminar and paying attention to the issue of Nordic cooperation in this important field. It is rare to have a Minister actually to attend an event. Usually they come and go. However, we'll start the seminar by giving the floor to Dag Verno Holter, Senior Advisor at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Norway is, of course, the country holding the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers at this time, and we are very grateful also for the participation of Norway in this seminar and for the support of the work. Mr. Werner Hölter, please, the floor is yours.
Does it still work?
If you try to tap it.
Yeah, it works. Well, Minister, Director Altola, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this seminar. It is a pleasure to be here, representing the Norwegian presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers. And on behalf of the presidency, I would like to start by thanking the Finnish Institute of International Affairs for their study on Nordic Resilience, commissioned by the Council last year, and to congratulate you on a quite impressive and most interesting report. The report will be presented and commented on by others, so I will not really go into the many important issues that are discussed there. Since I have been invited to give some introductory remarks, I will rather try to briefly set the context in which this study should be seen as part of the broader ongoing processes of developing and strengthening Nordic cooperation on crisis preparedness and crisis management. The pandemic led to a considerably increased focus on these issues, which in turn led to several initiatives during the Finnish presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2021. 3 different reports were commissioned by the Council. In addition to the one that is the subject of today's seminar, another study by your institute was presented in November last year, dealing specifically with the pandemic travel restrictions and their consequences on Nordic cooperation. And the so-called Enestam report, prepared by former Finnish Minister Jan-Erik Enestam, was also completed by November last year, offering a number of very concrete recommendations for strengthening our cooperation in this area. I should also mention that these issues have for some time been a priority for our parliamentarians within the framework of the Nordic Council. In November last year, the Nordic Prime Ministers adopted a joint declaration on the need to deepen our cooperation in the field of security of supply and preparedness. The point of departure was obviously the pandemic, but the declaration underlined the importance of an all-hazard approach and the need to prepare, quote, for all kinds of emergencies and crises caused by man or nature, unquote. Their declaration was thus a clear mandate to the Nordic governments to explore ways and means to strengthen our cooperation in this field. And the importance of the need to prepare for all kinds of crises has become even clearer to us than we would have thought only a short time ago, as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with its direct implications for our own situation, be it strategically or with regard to security of supply. At the same time, and this is important to underline, the Prime Ministers recall that, quote, Nordic cooperation is already extensive in many areas that support building more resilient and secure societies. They refer to the fact that relevant cooperation takes place both within the framework of the Nordic Council of Ministers and in separate Nordic structures, such as the Haga cooperation between authorities responsible for civil preparedness and security, the Nordic Defence Cooperation, the NORDEFCO, and the so-called Svalbard Group, which is a framework for cooperation between health authorities based on the Nordic Agreement on Health Preparedness, dating from 2002. Faced with quite legitimate questions and criticism that arose from the challenges that we met during the pandemic, it is also important to recall that Nordic cooperation in that situation was actually quite important. Contacts and information sharing between responsible authorities took place to a very large extent. Meetings within the Nordic Council of Ministers took place more often than usual, and informal and direct contacts between government officials and ministers were frequent. Although the approach taken on how to deal with the pandemic remain different among the Nordic countries. As we know, dealing with a crisis ultimately remains the responsibility of each national government. Contacts and cooperation also allowed us to solve, if not all, at least many of the problems that arose. Still, it is obvious that the potential exists for strengthened Nordic cooperation in this field, as studies, reports and recommendations have pointed out. This is also an important message in your study. The Nordic countries are particularly well placed for working together on these issues. And as mentioned, the Prime Ministers have given a clear mandate to our governments in this respect. So, how is this now being followed up? Strengthening of our cooperation in this field has been a priority for the Norwegian presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers. Early this year, the Nordic Cooperation Ministers discussed this question and decided that as part of their coordination responsibility, they would follow closely the follow-up processes and report on the status to the Nordic Council parliamentarians at the annual session in early November, which will take place here in Helsinki. In the following, I will point to some of the main elements that will appear in their report. So let me start by referring to the discussion and decision by the Nordic Cooperation Ministers with regard to their own role. There is agreement between the governments that responsibility for crisis preparedness and management will remain with the different line ministries and their specialized authorities. These authorities already work closely together at the Nordic level within different established frameworks, as already mentioned. The governments, therefore, do not find it useful to institute a particular responsibility for the cooperation ministers in this area, nor to establish new formal mechanisms for cooperation on these issues, as has been suggested by some. Proposals for further developing cooperation in the different sectors should and will therefore be followed up within the existing frameworks. However, as we saw during the pandemic, there may very well be a potential for improved communication among us and for ensuring even more efficiently a specific Nordic focus on how we deal with a crisis when it occurs. In a joint declaration from their meeting in June, the Nordic Cooperation Ministers therefore point to their responsibility in this regard and decide, inter alia, that in the event of a crisis, they will be ready to meet in order to, quote, communicate rapidly and smoothly and ensure that the Nordic perspective is considered as far as possible. Now, within the health sector, cooperation between our authorities was extensive at all levels during the pandemic, despite differences in approach. Experience and lessons learned from the pandemic underline the importance of such cooperation, both at Nordic and indeed at European level. In a joint declaration from March this year, the Nordic Ministers of Health point to a number of areas where they intend to further strengthen their cooperation, including through very concrete measures and projects. This includes improved mechanisms for sharing of health data and for communication and sharing of situation descriptions, coordinated emergency drills and exchange of experience, and a joint study on vaccine production, which was actually conducted right away this spring. Many of these projects build on existing cooperation, which in this way will be further developed based on our experience from the pandemic. The ministers also underline that strengthened Nordic cooperation will represent a valuable contribution to the broader European cooperation on health preparedness. Nordic cooperation in the field of civil security was formalized in 2009 in the so-called Haga Cooperation. At their ministerial meeting in 2021, the responsible Nordic ministers adopted the Haga Development Goals for the period 22 to 24, with three main priority areas: strengthening of civil security preparedness in light of experiences from the pandemic and the present critical situation following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Secondly, further development of cooperation with regard to our capacities for dealing with events related to climate change, such as forest fires, flooding, and landslides. And thirdly, improved measures for so-called host nation support in order to further facilitate mutual assistance across our borders in the event of a crisis. A more recent element in the Nordic cooperation on crisis preparedness was introduced some years ago when cooperation between the Haga framework and the Nordic Defence Cooperation, NORDEFCO, took shape. Security threats and risks have become more complex, and efficient cooperation and coordination between civil and military structures and resources have become even more important than before. Cooperation between the Haga and NORDEFCO structures have so far been focused on security threats from the possible use of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons and explosives, and on joint exercises within these areas. Further and broader development of this cooperation is on the agenda. The critical strategic and security situation that we are presently facing underlines the importance of this kind of civil-military cooperation, also at, of course, the Nordic level. The potential for a further strengthening at the Nordic level will be enhanced through Finland's and Sweden's future, or should we say possible or future, I prefer to say future, membership in NATO. And Finland and Sweden joining the alliance will also most likely contribute to an even stronger NATO focus on the complex security situation in our Nordic region. As it should be clear from these brief introductory remarks, Nordic cooperation on crisis preparedness and management is already quite extensive. Efforts to further develop and strengthen this cooperation across the different sectors are high on the priority agenda of our governments. In this work, very valuable inputs are being provided from studies, reports, and recommendations, such as your important report on Nordic Resilience, which now obviously will be the subject of thorough consideration in the time ahead. Following up by evaluation, assessment, discussions, decision-making, and implementation is a constantly ongoing process where concrete responsibilities remain with the relevant sectors. An important challenge then for our respective governments and for the different Nordic cooperation structures is to take a comprehensive view and to ensure efficiency, coordination, and synergies. We believe that by focusing on these issues from their perspective, the Nordic Cooperation Ministers also contribute to this ongoing process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you on those comments proving the relevancy of the report. And next I have the great pleasure of introducing Mikael Wickel, who has been working at FIA and as my colleague for a number of years. Brilliant mind, a lot of energy, and finds fascination in places where others don't even look. So, Mikael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mika, for that nice introduction. All right, so indeed I will be presenting the report, which you can find on our website, and also the hard copies are out there in the reception. You can grab one on the way out. So we're indeed been a team of a number of researchers at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs who've been working on this project, and this is the final report of this project. It has been indeed funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers, as you all heard, and the time span was roughly a year that we worked on this report. We had essentially 4 main goals with this project. The first was to really map. How can I actually see the slides here myself? I'll have to look up. Map and assess existing Nordic security of supply and crisis preparedness models. The second one was to assess potential disruptive drivers that are affecting our security of supply and crisis preparedness models in the Nordics. We're talking about, for instance, a pandemic that puts pressure on our models, on our preparedness models. It can have to do with the climate crisis and those sorts of threats and risks. That has to do with perhaps great power politics, what we've been seeing, sort of what I would call rise of geoeconomics that brings with it protectionist measures of different forms that may cause disruptions to supply lines. The third goal was to then evaluate the current status of Nordic cooperation within this field, and also to see what sort of potential there is for strengthening cooperation at the Nordic level. And finally, the goal was to provide very practical recommendations to policymakers to how to strengthen Nordic cooperation within this field. A few words about our research framework. We essentially used 3 methods when we went about this research. First was that we conducted very extensive document review. We went through, if not all, most of the research literature within this field over the board in the Nordics, and all the policy papers and whatnot that have been done before. Our second method was we did a lot of interviews with experts across the fields that have to do with security of supply and crisis preparedness. We did altogether 53 interviews with 85 persons, and those were no short interviews, they were long, very in-depth interviews. So we have a wealth of interview data when it comes to this field. Thirdly, we made a sort of focus group validation. So we essentially organized a workshop with a few experts, selected experts, to validate and test our findings, research findings, and also to discuss, provide ideas for our policy recommendations. So what you have here in this report is, I dare to say, the most comprehensive report yet on Nordic security supply and crisis preparedness. It contains a wealth of data, in addition to the recommendations. This is the structure of the report, essentially. In the introduction, we provide a context, we provide some recommendations there, and then we go through different perspectives on security supply and crisis preparedness across the Nordics. That means all the Nordic countries and the self-governing regions, Greenland, Faroe Islands, and the Åland Islands. So that's essentially a comparative analysis across the board in this report. The first chapter is about threat perceptions, how the Nordics evaluate threats and see risks, what are the risks and threats that one sees pertaining to this. And we find that essentially all the Nordics apply what we call a all hazards approach, and we heard already about the ministers calling for that. We essentially have in the Nordics in all Nordics, a all hazards approach to threats. So that means that we, in the Nordic, we focus on a panoply of different threats and risks, all from climate security risks to pandemics to more kind of hard power risks and everything in between. And that's smart because, of course, we don't know what the next crisis will be. So it's very so we can't kind of predict what the next crisis will be and next disruptions. We need to focus on a set of different ones. So that shared all hazard approach, it actually provides a basis also to strengthen Nordic cooperation very much, because we have this similar approach to risks and threats in the Nordics. And that in practice means that we could also easily step up that cooperation and share perhaps situational awareness, joint foresight and scenario reports if we would conclude that that would be good. And I think it might be good, a good idea for Nordic cooperation, because we indeed we face a lot of similar threats and risks. Next chapter is about really the ideas behind security of supply and crisis preparedness in the Nordics. How the different Nordics, the guiding principles for the organization of security of supply and crisis preparedness. There is no common terminology in the Nordics when talking about this, and that's a problem. It's not only an academic problem; it's a very practical problem, because if I work at the National Emergency Supply Agency, as Norti here knows, it's difficult to find the counterparts in other countries. It's difficult to know who is my peer, who is my colleague in another country, because we don't speak in the same terminology. We don't know the architecture of the other countries, how they organize their security supply systems, crisis preparedness. We need to find common terminology that would help with Nordic cooperation in this. What is good is that despite this different terminology, in practice we have very similar approaches. In all Nordics apply a societal security approach to this. We think, all Nordics think that it's important to include societal actors in preparedness work. That's a common idea behind our approach here. So we all follow a sort of whole society approach when we organize our preparedness work in the Nordics, and a whole of government approach, which means that there's a lot of different agencies and organizations involved in preparedness work. That's a common thing in the Nordics, even though we're speaking in different terms. What we propose in this report is to start to use some common language around the term resilience, because that's what it actually is about, and that's the terminology that is also very much in common with in Europe in general. Resilience is what we're dealing here with. We then did a mapping of all the actors and that have some responsibilities in preparedness work in the Nordics. And it's quite a messy map, because there's a lot of different actors involved with this work. We've tried now to come up with this sort of, to show the architecture in the different countries, and that was not an easy job to do. We spent a lot of time trying to map these actors in different countries, but it's important to map, and some further mapping should be done, because it's important in order for cooperation going forward. The actors need to find their peers in the other countries, so that they know who does what in Norway or Sweden or the Faroe Islands and so on and so forth. This is part of the mapping that we've done in this report. Here is sort of coordinating national agencies and their mandates, what's their responsibilities. NESA in Finland or DEMA in Denmark and so on and forth. We try to pin down what are their mandates, so to speak. I won't spend that much time on this, you will need to read the report to find out. Chapter 4, vital functions of society. So at present there is no common framework at the Nordic level on defining what are the vital functions, what are the critical functions of society actually. EU and NATO are starting to have that common framework. So NATO has its baseline criteria, and the EU is coming out with its Critical Entities Resilience Directive, where they sort of define the vital critical functions of society. At the Nordic level, we don't have that, but there are very kind of the common notion of societal security is a common element at the Nordic level, where it's clear that in all the Nordics we see societal involvement as being an essential role in essential part in safeguarding vital functions of society. So this is also something to build on when we think about strengthening Nordic cooperation. We have this common notion of societal security and a whole societal approach. Public-private dialogue. So a lot of the critical infrastructure, critical services of society are not in the hands of the state anymore, as it used to have been during the Cold War. In the Nordics, critical functions are now owned by private actors. And that means that we need to have this public-private dialogue. In order to prepare ourselves for different contingencies, risks and threats, we need to have this constant dialogue with the private actors that are in charge of these critical functions. In Finland, for instance, we have that private dialogue. NESA has its pools where there is certain coordination between the public and private spheres. There is no such function at the Nordic level at the time being. And it might be important to set that up, a sort of public-private dialogue at the Nordic level, also because there is so much interdependency on the Nordic level. So a lot of the sort of critical functions of Finnish society, for instance, might be partly in the hands of Swedish private actors, or Norwegian, and so on and forth. So in order to prepare ourselves for, say, a pandemic, the next pandemic, or next crisis of some sort, it would be helpful that we could be able to prepare together with private actors at the Nordic level. So something along that line needs to be built up. And we have some recommendations for how to do it, of course, in this report. Here is what we've sort of trying to gather, everything that is already being done at the Nordic, in this field at the Nordic level. So the different formats of cooperation which are there already. And it's a scattered scene. There's a lot of different things already happening, as we just heard before. A lot is already being done, and we're trying to just gather this list of different frameworks already, so that we kind of have it clear for ourselves, this scattered field anyway. When we did our interviews, when it came to the sort of collaboration and the existing ones, we certainly found that almost all interviews agreed that there is a need for more cooperation, and also to structure that cooperation a bit better. Now it's scattered in different sectors and so on and forth. But it needs to be some kind of overall framework that would collect these different notions now to one. And it was certainly a priority that we noted from everybody we talked about, all the experts we've talked about, that something more kind of needs to be, so that we can set clear goals going forward as well. And on the basis of those findings from these interviews, we also make different recommendations again, and present some ideas for how to gather that cooperation a bit better. Lastly, a few key takeaways from the report. Lastly, before I go to the recommendations, a few key takeaways from this report. So, first of all, it's clear that more Nordic cooperation is needed. The Nordics are very dependent on each other. It's one of the most interdependent regions of the world, and we have our open economies and open societies. So it's very difficult for any one Nordic country or self-governing region to be self-sufficient. We're kind of bound to each other very much, which is one strong motivation for doing more cooperation. It's also clear that a lot of the threats facing the Nordics might have cascading effects. So if we, in say Finland or Sweden or Norway, face an attack on our electric grid, that will spill over to other countries as well, and that goes for many sectors. It might have go with data cables, or it might have to do with a lot of sort of cyber systems and so on and forth, which have cascading effects. So that's another motivation also having to prepare ourselves together a bit better. The good news is that there are asymmetries in a way. Finland has its strong points in certain areas and sectors, and Denmark has its strong points in other sectors, and so there is complementarity. We can complement each other very much in the Nordic level if we kind of plan for this cooperation a bit ahead. The second takeaway is that even though there's sort of, when we started this project, there was this notion that Nordics organize their security of supply and crisis preparedness in so different ways that it's hard to do cooperation. Well, it is, but we actually already have a sort of a joint Nordic approach to this, even though we speak of it in very different terms. And we, in our research, we found essentially 4 traits that are very common when it comes to this at Nordic level. First of all, the whole society approach. In all the Nordics, the approach is to take society, that society needs to be included in preparedness work. And that's clear in all the Nordics, that the state alone cannot prepare for most crises and threats. Whole of government approach. This is indeed an approach that a lot of different agencies and institutions need to be involved at different levels of government. And that's the approach that all the Nordics take. And that's, again, a common trait for the Nordics. An all hazards approach, I already before alluded to that all the Nordics see a panoply of different threats. It's not only that in some countries, the focus is only on perhaps terrorist threats. The Nordics will see a number of different threats that we need to be prepare ourselves to. And finally, societal resilience thinking is a common trait in all Nordic societies. So there is this common ground actually to cooperate as well, because it's indeed a joint approach in many ways in the Nordics. Then to our recommendations, we essentially have 4 bundles. We give 4 bundles of recommendations. First is that indeed there is, as I showed you the list of existing bi- and multilateral agreements, there's a lot of them, but there is no shared framework that would sort of collect those agreements under some kind of umbrella. And we think it would be important to have a sort of umbrella resilience framework agreement that would not replace any of the cooperation going on already. It would just gather them under a sort of umbrella framework. It would make it more clear to everybody what goes on. It would make it easier to plan ahead as well if we would have that umbrella. And it would elevate the concept of Nordic resilience, which would be important to create this shared terminology in Nordic that would help cooperation in many ways. We make a specific recommendation for the Haga Cooperation as well. We will present and discuss a bit the Haga Cooperation. At present, the self-governing regions are not involved in the Haga Cooperation. And we see little reason for them, self-governing regions, not to be in there in the Haga Cooperation. So we think that Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Northern Islands would benefit very much from being involved, and everybody else would benefit very much from being involved in Haga Cooperation because it concerns them very much when we think of, for instance, rescue cooperation, which affects these regions quite a lot. So that's a specific recommendation that pertains to the self-governing regions. The second recommendation that we make is that we could establish more shared risk perceptions and foresight at the Nordic level. And shared understanding of the sort of dependencies, risks and threats that the Nordic face would go a long way already to prepare the region much better to the sort of preparedness work that needs to be done. And we come up with a few ideas how we could practically organize that sort of shared risk perceptions and foresight at the Nordic level. And of course there is the Nordic Security Agreement of 2013 that provides a basis for sharing information very much as well. The third recommendation, establishing a Nordic Resilience Fund. cooperation needs to be funded in some way. And I know, of course, for the Nordic Council of Ministers and for the governments in general, they don't like funding new things very much. But there needs to be, if one wants to cooperate and create better framework for Nordic cooperation, some of that needs to be funded as well. And for that purpose, we think it would be important to create a Nordic Resilience Fund. There are different models for those funds. New Zealand has a well-functioning fund model for preparedness work. Finland has a very well-functioning national model for that as well. One could look at those experiences and take ideas from there how to create such a fund. And of course, it can be then structured in different ways, and we provide some ideas for that. Finally, a Nordic Resilience public-private network. I spoke earlier about the importance of having this public-private dialogue also at the Nordic level, because so much of the critical functions in infrastructure are in the hands of private actors. And at present there is not much in the way of a dialogue at the Nordic level, even though we're so interconnected. So something along that line would be very important to create at the Nordic level as well. That goes on very much at the national level at the time being, but not at the Nordic level. So that was essentially the main points from this very dense report. Thank you. And Mika had to leave, so I'll kind of take the chair on the chairing of this seminar now as well. And I will, of course, not allow any critical voices on our report at all. But Vivi, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Is it on? Yeah. My name is Vivian Bagalo-Schöne. I come from the Ministry of Interior here in Helsinki. And thank you so much for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here. And the most important, thank you for the report. It's really impressive, comprehensive, and very informative. And when I listened to Mikael here, I had an impression that, oh, I should really know all the things that is in the report and as a civil servant, but I don't know it, so I really will take time to read it thoroughly through, because I think it's a very, if I may say, a remarkable report. And I must also admit that I already used some of the wordings from the report when writing the speaking notes for our Minister Krista Mikkonen last summer, and also because we had the report, even if it wasn't given, we had the wordings already there. So I used already some of the findings, or not findings, but some things from here, and I do think that I will continue to do that in the upcoming speaking notes. The recent crisis, first the pandemic and then the Russian attack in Ukraine, have affected the whole world in an unpredictable way, as we know. All of us have needed to adjust very swiftly to many new things, and at the same time face different shortcomings. Energy crisis and disruption of food supply are just a few examples of this, unfortunately also. I mean, all these crises going on. The change of the security environment have forced us to reconsider many things, not only concerning our national security, but also our role in the international context. The submission for a NATO membership from both Finland and Sweden is in a sense ends some era and is a beginning of a new one, most hopefully. Also for the Nordic cooperation. About the report, even if the tasking to you researchers here was given in the aftermath of the corona crisis, this report could not have been launched in more timely. It's a very important report just today, unfortunately, that also. I got an impression when we worked, if I say we, I was also a little bit involved in this report, that it wasn't really an easy task. Listening to Mikael here and seeing the report, one of the main, not main problems, but one of the problems that we realized was also what you talked about was the terminology, the definitions. We talk about almost the same things in all the Nordic countries, but we use different words. For example, in Sweden, they use this civilt försvar. That's a wording that we don't use at all here in Finland, or in Norway, I have an impression. We talk about civil beredskap, beredskapsfrågor, and also all these authorities and ministries and whatever involved, it's also almost the same, but same but different. But I would like to thank the researchers here and FIA for listening to us that you interviewed, and also to the feedback that you got, and you changed a bit your approach to the report, and I would say that it's a very good one, and I hope this will get more emphasis on these questions. You also said, Mikael, that we should start to use the common definition, and also is a proposal in the report to start to use resilience. That we already do in the Ministry of Interior. In this context, we talk about resilience. Our societies need to be more resilient, need to be better prepared for known and unknown crises, and even for cascading events. The war in Ukraine has shown how important a resilient civil society is, even in a military conflict. In a war, a country still needs, for example, energy, telecommunication and road infrastructure, as well as rescue and police services, which is those questions that we are in charge for in the Ministry of the Interior. The war should not make us forget other threats. As we know, climate change affects all aspects and all societies. As a result of this climate change, we may see even more frequent, persistent and severe extreme weather events that in the future call for stronger preparedness and strengthen climate resilience. About the Nordic cooperation and also some of the outcomes from this report, I would say that the Nordic cooperation is every day getting even more important than before. We use always a word that it's a momentum. It's definitely a momentum now for the Nordic cooperation. I take just the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Haga and the Haga-Nordefco work, as Dag was already mentioning. I've been working personally with those corporations very much, and the Haga cooperation is a cooperation between the ministries, and in all the Nordic countries there are different ministries in charge, because as we could see also in the report that there are different ministries discussing these questions. In Finland is the Ministry of the Interior, in Sweden is Justitiedepartementet, in Norway the civil military is in the Ministry of Defense, so it's the same ministry for both parts of this. In Norway you have Justitieberedskapsdepartementet, and in Iceland it's the Ministry of Justice, also there, and Sweden was. So you can see there is different ministers in charge, and these ministers don't meet in other contexts like in EU or others. So it was in 2009 it was decided that there is a need for a cooperation between these crisis preparedness ministers, or whatever you want to call it. When the COVID, the corona came, and also when Nordiska rådet, the Council of Ministers, started to discuss this question, there was a few comments that why hasn't there been any cooperation before? Why is nothing happening? I tend to say that it was because we were so lucky that there weren't that many crises that were, you know, of course there always been crises, but now when we're in this, so you can definitely say that those level of crisis. So the Haga cooperation was kind of there was a cooperation, but it wasn't very known, fortunately in that sense, that way. Now the Haga cooperation is very active. It's very intense, if I may say, and Doug was telling you about we try to have some kind of framework for the Haga cooperation, and the crisis, the climate crisis is one that I think that you can't. Today you can't just, you can't have a crisis preparedness cooperation without mentioning that. I mean, that's very important, even having all these other crises going on, and crises that we don't even know about from what will come. And then this host nation support, that means that how can we support each other, how can a country, a Nordic country, help each other. And now we talk on the civilian side. Host nation support is a terminology that they use at the military side a lot, but as we can see, there is also a need, as I said, for the civil side to be prepared for the crisis. And a bridge to this Haga-Nordefco cooperation. The Haga has also one of its emphasis is the civil-military cooperation. There is no country, I suppose, where there is, for example, military hospitals or military telecommunication or military food or military water. Everything is the civil societies helping the military forces. So the civil-military cooperation is very much, it's very important and something that we should continue. The Haga-Nordefco cooperation, Nordefco is the Nordic Defense Cooperation. We started it, I must say that, take a little bit of credit to Finland. We started the first ever co-meeting was last year, almost a year ago here in Helsinki. And there was, as Doug was saying, there were some, if we would like to say, baby steps how the cooperation started, but in 1.5 weeks there will be the second Haga-Nordefco cooperation meeting on a high level, not the ministerial level, but a high level in Oslo. So we continue this and definitely see it, that is important. About recommendations in your report. I will comment the first 2 recommendations, and I think Nuti will take maybe the 3 and 4. It's more his work, if I put it that way. Nordic Resilience Framework Agreement. And I would say that the emphasis should be on the framework. I think it is a good idea. Of course, it's nice from you researchers to just throw in this, that there should be an agreement, but I start to think, okay, what kind of agreement, what kind of legal agreement between states, who will do that, we really need to involve, you know, I don't know who. You don't take, of course, you just say that there should be an agreement. It's up to us civil servants to think what kind of agreement it should be. There might be a need for that. Looking back and looking forward, I see that, and now I talk, you know, just my own thoughts about this. The recommendation 2, shared risk perception and foresight. This is something that in every crisis, in every whatever, it's the most important. We should know what's going on, what is happening to be able to prepare and also to act after that. Okay, And then you, researchers again, you throw that there should be this common risk perception. Okay. I would say that quite soon we come to this, the information is kind of classified, at least if we would have, you know, information that everybody would know, then also maybe our enemies would know, you know. But I mean, so it's also a very good proposal. But then, as a civil servant, I immediately start to think, okay, how would we do that? But hey, this is something that we need to look into, and I would say that a shared understanding on the situation also between the Nordic countries would be beneficial to all of us. I won't touch upon 3 and 4, but I would, in the end, I would like to think about a little bit the follow-up for this report. As I said in the very beginning, I think this is a very, very important and topical report. It needs to be taken forward in some way. And it was the Nordic Council of Ministers who asked for this report, and we have Dag here taking forward this as Norway is chairing that council this year and Iceland next year. It's the Nordic Cooperation Ministers that are in charge for that, but all these things are, you know, there are ministries in charge for the tasks. So we need to think also who is doing what, not to duplicate any work. But I do think that, and I do hope as a civil servant from the Ministry of Interior, that this report won't be forgotten and would definitely be taken forward. And I will do my utmost in my work to keep the spirit up for this report. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Liv, for those remarks and for your very positive attitude to the report and for your positive spirit in taking this forward. And of course, we as researchers enjoy some leeway in making recommendations that might be practically not that straightforward, but we hope we've set the bar sufficiently high that you will approach somewhere towards that in any case. But on shared risk perceptions, I think ideally, of course, it would be extended to the sort of secret level, but it doesn't need to. I mean, there's a lot of risk assessment, common risk assessment that you can do without having this access to classified information. There's a lot of that can be done as well. But in any case, Nuutti, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Nuutti Nikola, and I'm grateful to be here. And as Vivian said, that's a great report. And I think it's one of my tasks now is to make sure that everybody in NESA actually reads it, because on some occasions we are too busy to do the sort of day-to-day work and not sort of understanding what we are doing in a more sort of in-depth way. And I think that's a really good report to sort of understand how the resilience is sort of carried out in the Nordics. One of the things I would comment is that now that the EU is sort of implementing the Nordic ideas of resilience and there's this self-directive coming, I think this report could be really useful to, for example, for Southern European countries to sort of understand what the Nordic thinking is and how we see how to enhance resilience and so on. Because at least in NESA, when we sort of talked about the coming self-directive to our sort of network of critical companies and so, we are telling them that now EU is becoming more Nordic about how to manage the sort of civil sector preparedness. I would also like to mention that the mapping slides are incredibly useful, because we have tried to do that quite a lot about ourselves and also about different EU actors and so on. And the problem is that most countries have these sort of same elements or ideas, but as you mentioned, Mikael, they are always a bit different on organizational level. And it's for government agencies, it's hard to have dialogue with other agencies from other countries if you don't sort of understand how they are built up. For NESAs, one of the sort of most important tasks is to identify the private sector companies and to create cooperation with them. This is quite hard in a national level, and it's even more hard to do in a multinational level. And I think that one of your recommendations to sort of create more Nordic level networks about this is really important. And as you mentioned, sharing situational awareness can be quite hard for practical reasons because it's usually classified information and so on. But in NESA we have sort of done that so we collect data from our network, which is almost 1,000 critical private companies. And the idea is not just to collect that information and share it to the political decision makers, but to also share that information to other critical companies, because they are all interconnected in the sort of market economy, and they need to know and understand the sort of risks and different security factors that are sort of creating the ecosystem where they operate. And I think sharing this sort of information between Swedish or Norwegian or Danish or Icelandic companies, that could be sort of it would be a sort of an not as problematic as sharing sort of information coming from intelligence organizations and so on. So that's a sort of a low-hanging fruit, but that's also something that's easy to say, but it would sort of need some sort of pre-planning and also implementing the similar systems that we have in Finland to identify these critical companies. Now, I already mentioned the CER directive that is coming, and that's something that forces every EU nation state to sort of implement that system, to understand those critical sectors and understand what are the companies that sort of operate in those sort of resilience creating sectors. And one of the good things in CER directive is also that sorry, I heard that. Yeah. So it means that all the nation states are implementing the similar sort of hubs that at least should understand all the private actors that are vital for different member states. And that would make the sort of cooperation with different countries more easy. Okay, then I think one of the ideas that you showed there is that the Nordic economies understand that they are very open and they are vulnerable to sort of threats that aren't in their own hands, meaning that as most of the GDP comes from international trade and so on, so the sort of dependencies from the outer world is sort of accepted. Now, I think that all the modern economies are quite dependent on the world economy, but in some other sort of EU states, this isn't accepted as such a fact that it's always been done in the Nordic countries. And this is something that I think makes the sort of the Nordic way of thinking very sort of useful to building a more resilient EU, for example. Now, I mentioned that there are some practical problems with the situational awareness, but I think that that's something that can be sort of planned out and more sharing of information would, at least from Nessa's point, would be really important. The foresight is something that we are doing quite a lot. And for example, we started in December 21 to sort of collect more and more rapidly information for Finnish companies that what would happen if the Russian would attack. And we were sort of, we sort of accepted the US intelligence idea that this is going to happen. And I think in Finland that created some sort of preparedness that has helped at least the Finnish society to sort of manage this horrible attack. Now this is something that we could have done with cooperation with other Nordic states. I also think that the idea about sort of resilience fund would be really beneficial because it would sort of force different Nordic countries to create measurements and to create joint solutions in order to actually have that sort of grassroots type of planning and preparedness done. Because at the moment we have these, quite a lot of these sort of high-level papers about how the things should be, but we don't have that much sort of practical solutions or concrete steps how to actually increase the resilience between different countries. So I think this could be a good idea. I also think that it was good to mention joint exercises because that's something that we do constantly in Finland with cooperation with private sectors, with electricity companies and so on. And a lot of these companies, their headquarters can be based in other countries and so on. And there's quite a lot of trust between the Nordic sort of citizenship. So it would be sort of more beneficial for example, financial sector to have exercises where they could sort of play these sort of different scenarios so that the sort of the exercise wouldn't be just about Finland or Sweden or so on, but it would be sort of a more Nordic level exercise. And this is something that we have tried to achieve, and we have done it quite a bit in some fields, but it's something that we could sort of do more. But that's sort of my comments, and as I said, thanks a lot about this great report.
Thanks a lot for your remarks, Jyrki, and also for your positive attitude to the report and how you've read it. I think before yielding the floor to Minister Blomqvist, I think we have time for one or two questions. If there are any questions in the audience, I'd be happy to take them, and also perhaps they can be addressed, perhaps even to Dag, maybe Murti, if need be, if there are anything immediate that pops to mind. If not, then Minister Blomqvist will have more time to talk, which is not a bad thing either. So, Minister Blomqvist, many thanks for your participation before today.
Thank you, participants. It is a great pleasure for me to be here, and I'm sorry that I came just to hear the last words from the previous speaker. But I'm pleased to give the closing remarks of this meeting. And I'm especially happy to be able to thank the Finnish Institute of International Affairs for preparing this important and very timely report on Nordic resilience. Subject was topical even before Russia's intensified war of aggression against Ukraine, and it has become even more important in the current security situation. Security and of the supply and crisis preparedness was a central theme during the Finnish presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers last year. The work culminated in a declaration by the Prime Ministers in November last year. to support the initiative launched by the Finnish Prime Minister, the Ministers for Nordic Cooperation, commissioned a baseline study in order to map the present situation of Nordic cooperation in security of supply and preparedness. Additionally, the task was to scan for new cooperation potential without duplicating existing structures. FIA's research group has carried out this work in an exemplary manner. Thank you for that. And the research report adds a great deal of empirical data, which we lacked before, and provides a detailed comparative analysis of the Nordic preparedness models. It also identifies clear opportunities for Nordic cooperation. Something similar has not been done before, and I'm sure the report will prove to be very valuable and useful. Moving the discussions forward and advancing towards concrete measures is now key. In this context, I would like to state that the basic principles regarding crisis cooperation are clear. The responsibility for crisis preparedness and management lies with the relevant ministries and authorities. There is a broad consensus that existing structures should be utilized to develop the cooperation further and add new dimensions. There is a lot of potential to further advance practical cooperation possibilities. In the Nordics, we are stronger together. I would also like to highlight that the cooperation ministers have their own role, also in times of crisis. We can and should promote the Nordic perspective both between our countries and within our national administrations. We can contribute to making communication between our countries as efficient and effective as possible, and we are glad to do so. At our June meeting in Halden in Norway this year, we issued a joint declaration to this end. The current Norwegian presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers has indeed continued to advance the cooperation in this sector. And this brings me to my last point, which is that strengthening Nordic crisis preparedness and security of supply cooperation is also a high priority for the Nordic Council. We have an excellent opportunity to come back to this issue during the 74th session of the Nordic Council in early November here in Helsinki. This seminar has provided us with much food for thought, and I look forward to our continued discussions in different forums. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister Blomqvist, and thanks to all of the participants for very constructive feedback. I'm very relieved, and it was good to note that it had been taken on board very well, this report. I do hope that it will provide some input to the further discussions that we also pleased to hear, of course, that there's a lot of priority put on this topic now, and with good reason. So with those words, I thank all the audience and the participants of the panel and Mr. Blomqvist, and have a good day.